Hello everyone, you're back with Mr. Abdul Wahab and we're going through the SAT practice test number 2, which you can download from the College Board website. It's for free, of course, and they are practice exams that you could get your hands on along with the answer keys and the explanations. We're going through them just to show everyone that the SAT doesn't have to be intimidating or hard or tough, that it is possible to get all correct answers on all questions if you practice a lot, that's first of all, and if you use a certain logic or a certain methodology while trying to solve it. Now, our approach is not one where I put all the rules at the beginning and then we begin by applying them. Not really. It's more applied rather than theoretical. So as we go, we're going to be dealing with different kinds of questions, and we will see how each question should be answered within its context. So in my previous videos, we went through the first two texts. We went through the first one, and we answered all the questions on it correctly. The second text as well, and we answered all of the questions. And we went through the third one. Now today, we'll be going through the fourth one. And to be quite clear again, you are going to encounter different forms of writing as you read or go through the SAT. So far, we've done the first text, which was a piece of fiction or literature as it's considered in the SAT. We've done a piece of social studies, we've done a piece of science, and now this is concerned with US history. And you should expect on the SAT to come across a piece of US history that you need to read, understand, and analyze in order to answer the questions that follow. So, as usual, we're going to begin by reading the intro or the caption at the beginning of the text. I urge all of you to do so, just to get a general idea of what the text is gonna talk about. And then we'll do questions 33 to 42. This passage is taken from Elizabeth Cady Stanton's address to the 1869 Women's Suffrage Convention in Washington, D.C. Now, for those of you who don't know, women's suffrage was the movement asking for the right of women to vote. They were asking for their right to vote. They were asking for their right to take part in the political life and to have their say taken into consideration by society. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton was one of the leaders in this field. So, without further ado, let's go through the text. And again, pieces of nonfiction don't have to be boring. You can read them just as energetically, and you could have just as much fun with them as pieces of literature. Actually, sometimes certain pieces of literature could actually come across as duller or more challenging than pieces of nonfiction. So let's go through this one. I think that the topic is actually quite interesting, and it is relevant to this day. So I urge a 16th Amendment. So Elizabeth Stanton wants a 16th Amendment to the Constitution because manhood suffrage or a man's government is civil, religious, and social disorganization. Right from the start, Elizabeth Stanton makes her opinions very clear. She believes that a man's government, is disorganization on every level. She is not hiding or trying to euphemize, if I may say, her beliefs. She's quite straight. She's quite honest. So the male element is a destructive force, stern, selfish, aggrandizing. Aggrandizing means it loves itself in a way. Loving war, it loves war, violence, conquest, acquisition, breeding in the material and moral world alike, discord, disorder, disease, and death. So again, right from the beginning, from the first few lines, we could clearly see that Elizabeth Staton is really upset with male-dominated society, and she probably wants change. She wants a 16th Amendment, a law that would protect women's rights to vote. See what a record of blood and cruelty the pages of history reveal. Through what slavery, slaughter, and sacrifice, through what inquisitions and imprisonments, pains, and persecutions, black codes and gloomy creeds, the soul of humanity has struggled for centuries, while mercy has veiled her face, while mercy has stood aside, and sorry, and all hearts have been dead alike to love and hope. So, in a way, in the first paragraph, Elizabeth Staton is blaming almost all of the past mistakes and cruelties and catastrophes, of course, human committed catastrophes, blaming them on males who have dominated society for the past centuries or since the beginning of modern civilization. So, the male element has held high carnival thus far. It has fairly run riot from the beginning, overpowering the feminine element everywhere. So the male element has held high carnival. That's like saying they've had the upper hand so far. It has fairly run riot, run amok, run in disorder from the beginning, overpowering the feminine element everywhere, crushing out all the diviner qualities in human nature, until we know but little of true manhood and womanhood. So, the male element, which she described as a destructive force, stern and selfish and aggrandizing and loving of war and violence and conquest and acquisition and so on, this male element have obscured or actually overcome actual true manhood, or what true manhood should mean. The term manhood has come to mean all of the negative things mentioned in the first paragraph. So we no longer know what true manhood or even womanhood means. Of the latter means the last, which is womanhood, okay, of the latter, comparatively nothing. We know almost nothing, for it has scarce, rarely been recognized as a power at all until within the last century. So we've barely begun to understand what womanhood could be only fairly until or within the last century. And again, Elizabeth Staton is writing in 1869, so she's speaking within the last century of that time. Society is but the reflection of man himself, untempered by woman's thoughts. So society at that time, and even these days to a certain extent, is only the reflection of man himself. There is no female or feminine element in society. Women have not had their effects recognized in society. They haven't influenced society in any way. That's what Elizabeth is saying, of course. The hard iron rule we feel alike in the church, with priests, in the state, with politicians, and the home, with fathers and brothers and so on. So she's referring to how the male element has been ruling in almost every way, in the religious way, in the political way, and even in the domestic or the social way. No one need wonder at the disorganization, again she refers back to the disorganization, or at the fragmentary condition. Fragmentary comes from the word fragment. Fragments are pieces of something. When something is fragmentary, it's broken down into pieces. At the fragmentary condition of everything, when we remember that man, who represents but half a complete being, with but half an idea on every subject, has undertaken the absolute control of all sublunary matters. So basically here she's trying to say that man is only half of society, but he's taken over all of society. All of the decisions are made through men, or males, while again women are cast aside or not incorporated into society. People object. People object to the demands of those whom they choose to call the strong-minded. We're gonna see who the strong-minded are. Because they say the right of suffrage will make women masculine. So again, people object to the demands of those whom they choose to call. So these people who are objecting to the demand of suffrage or the women's right to vote, these people, they're calling the ones who are asking for this strong-minded. Why? Because they say that the right of suffrage, of voting, will make the women like men, masculine. That is just the difficulty in which we are involved today. Though disfranchised means, again, cast aside or not incorporated within society, we have few women. We have few women means a small amount of women in the best sense. And here you need to focus on the meaning of best. We have few women in the best sense, in the actual real sense. We have simply so many reflections, varieties, and dilutions. Dilutions are miniature, in a sense, of the masculine gender. So even women who are present in society at the time aren't actually feminine, according to Elizabeth. Womanhood itself is not clear what it is. What they have is a very small amount of actual true women. As she said here, we have few women in the best sense. We have simply so many reflections and varieties, so many different kinds of the masculine gender. So even women are acting like men or acting in a way which men condone or acting in the way that men want them to act, and we don't have an actual true original woman character. The strong natural characteristics of womanhood are repressed. They are repressed. They are not allowed to show themselves. They are ignored, these strong natural characteristics of womanhood or of women. In dependence, okay, they are only allowed to grow in dependence. For so long as man feeds woman, she will try to please the giver and adapt herself to his condition. To keep a foothold in society, to remain present in society, woman must be as near like man as possible. So in order to have her presence recognized in society, a woman has to act and behave almost like a man, as similar to man as possible. She has to reflect his ideas, okay? She has to be as near like man as possible. She has to reflect his ideas, opinions, virtues, motives, prejudices, and vices. She must respect his statutes, his laws. Though they strip her, they take away of every inalienable right, of every right which is hers. They strip her away of her rights. And women, or the woman, has to agree with those laws if she wants to keep her foothold in society. And this causes conflict with that higher law written by the finger of God, by God on her own soul. Here she's referring to religious laws. That even by agreeing with man, she's coming into conflict, or by asking for her rights, she's coming into conflict with the laws written by God. Man has been molding woman. Man has been molding woman, or changing her, okay, to his like, modifying her by direct positive influences, while she, if not a negation, has used indirect means to control him, and in most cases developed the very characteristics both in him and herself that needed repression. So even women have developed the very characteristics which are present in man, which are the characteristics that actually need repression or that actually need to disappear from society. And now even man himself, stands appalled at the results of his own excesses, mourns in bitterness that falsehood, selfishness, and violence are the law of life. So even men nowadays are appalled, are horrified by the results they have produced in society. They are appalled by their own excesses. It's when you exceed your limits. And they mourn in bitterness and sadness that falsehoods, lying, selfishness, caring about only one's self, and violence are the law of life now. The need of this hour is not territory. We shouldn't care about territory or gold mines, money, or railroads, or specky payments, small payments, but a new evangel of womanhood, a new right of womanhood, to exalt purity, virtue, morality, true religion, actual religion, not the one manipulated by men, to lift man up into the higher realms, to take man up into the higher realms of thought and action. So even to improve the mental state of man. We ask women's enfranchisement, to put women back into society or to bring her into society for the first time, as the first step toward the recognition of that essential element in government that can only secure the health, strength, and prosperity of the nation. Whatever is done to lift woman to her true position will help to usher in, to introduce a new day of peace and perfection for the race. So anything done to improve the state of women in society will help usher or lead to a state of more peace and perfection for all of the human race. Basically, it's going to benefit the human race. Now, in speaking of the masculine element, pay attention to the use of the words masculine element. I do not wish to be understood to say that all men are hard, selfish, and brutal, for many of the most beautiful spirits the world has known have been clothed with manhood. But I refer to those characteristics, though often marked in woman, that distinguish what is called the stronger sex, that is man. For example, the love of acquisition. Those are the male characteristics, or the masculine elements are the love of acquisition and conquest. The very pioneers of civilization, when expended on the earth, when they take their effects on the earth, the sea, the elements, the riches and forces of nature, are powers of destruction. Whenever they take their effects on the world, they are forces or powers of destruction. When used to subjugate, to repress one man to another, or to sacrifice nations to ambition. Here, that great conservator, the one who conserves, that great conservator of woman's love, the one who makes or takes care of woman's love, if permitted to assert itself, if woman's love is permitted to assert itself, as it naturally would in freedom against oppression, violence, and war, would keep all these destructive forces in check. So basically, if women were allowed to take part in society, Elizabeth Staten is saying that this female element would actually keep the male forces, which are again, or the male elements, which are one of oppression and destruction and war and violence. The female element would keep those male elements in check. They wouldn't allow all of these things to happen. For woman knows the cost of life better than man does. And not with her consent, not with her approval, would one drop of blood ever be shed, or one sacrificed in vain for nothing. So that's the text, and actually it's not a quite difficult text to answer. I mean, the opinions of Elizabeth Staton are actually made quite clear from the beginning all through to the end. And so let's go through the questions. I don't think that these questions are actually going to be hard. Now, what's the central problem that Stanton describes in the passage is that women have been, so what's the central problem? Is that women have been denied equal educational opportunities. Well, she didn't talk about education. Education wasn't mentioned in the text. Prevented from exerting their positive influence on men, which has led to societal breakdown. Well, Elizabeth did talk about how women were not allowed to exert their feminine or positive influence on men. So this seems like a good idea. Let's check the rest, see if there's a better answer. Prevented from voting, which has resulted in poor candidates winning important elections. Now, of course, the first part of the answer is correct, but she didn't discuss the other part. She didn't say that because women have been prevented from voting, that poor candidates have been winning important elections. This wasn't an idea she discussed. Blocked by men from serving as legislators. Now, they have been blocked by men from voting. That was the 16th Amendment, or that's what she was asking. They were asking for the right to vote. First to vote, later on, they would ask for the right to perform as legislators, and the main focus of the passage is on the right to vote, not on the right to become legislators or politicians or to take part in the political life by becoming politicians, which has allowed the creation of unjust laws. Now, she didn't talk much about unjust laws. She just has been talking about the very terrible state of women at that time because they don't have the right to vote, because they're not taking part in the political life of society. So B seems to be the best answer. Now, Stanton uses the phrase high carnival in line 15 mainly to emphasize what she sees as the... Now, let's go back to line 15 to check how high carnival was used. And I think we talked about it because it seemed quite a very strange way of expressing oneself. The male element has held high carnival thus far. It has fairly run riot from the beginning, overpowering the feminine element everywhere, crushing out all the diviner qualities in human nature. So the meaning that we could get from here is that the male element has held the upper hand in a sense. They have overpowered or taken control of women. They have been the stronger element in society. So she uses the phrase high carnival to emphasize what she sees as the utter domination of women by men. This looks good. Freewheeling spirit of the age. Not actually. Scandalous decline in moral values. Well, whatever she's describing is something negative, but it's not a decline in moral values. And when you mention something like this, you're referring to a decline in moral values in all of society, because the option C isn't saying a decline in moral values for men. And D, growing power of women in society, this actually goes in opposition with everything that the text says. So the best answer is A. Now, Stanton claims that which of the following was a relatively recent historical development? Which one of those actually happened recently? The control of society by men? Of course not. She said that men have been controlling society since the beginning of time. The spread of war and injustice? She actually also says that these things have been present since the beginning of time. The domination of domestic life by men? Again, she says that things have been this way all throughout history. The acknowledgement of women's true character. This is true. This is true, and we know that this is true, and this was mentioned in the text, because if you go back up, she says that since the male element has held the upper hand thus far, it is fairly run riot from the beginning, overpowering the feminine element everywhere, crushing out all the diviner qualities in human nature until we know little of true manhood and womanhood. Of the latter, of womanhood, almost nothing, comparatively nothing, for it has scarce been recognized as a power until within the last century. So this is something that has happened recently. It has been recognized as a power only recently, within the last century. So this question is followed by which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question. Again, you could go through all of these, but we've done this before, and we said that there are, when you're confident of your answer on the previous question and you know where you got the information from, you don't actually need to go through each and every one of those. And we know that we got our answer from this part, 15 to 22, right here in this part. So if we have a choice like that, it's actually the correct choice immediately. So I don't like to waste time on things that we could actually do in a few minutes. You can go through each one of those options, but I'm very confident with B. I'm quite confident. Now, as used in line 24, rule most nearly refers to, let's go to rule in line 24. No one need wonder at the disorganization. So I'm going to read actually from 22 to get the whole context. Always go through the words or the sentences before and after to get the context correctly. Society is but the reflection of man himself, untempered, unaffected by woman's thought. The hard iron rule we feel alike in the church, the state, and the home. So we're talking about when a person rules another or dominates another. So as used in line 24, rule most nearly refers to a general guideline. Not exactly. We're not talking about guidelines or rules in the sense of laws. A controlling force sounds good. A controlling force is a force that controls others or dominates others. An established habit. Not actually, again, we're not talking about customs or habits. A procedural method. Not really. We're not doing experiments here. So it is a controlling force or a dominating force. It can reasonably be inferred that the strong-minded was a term generally intended to, again, the term strong-minded was used here, that people object to the demands of those whom they choose to call the strong-minded. Why? Because those who are called the strong-minded by the people say that the right of suffrage will make the women masculine. So it can reasonably be inferred that the strong-minded was a term generally intended to, what was this term strong-minded used for, or used to mean or to intend or to insinuate? Was it used to praise women who fight for their long-denied rights? It doesn't seem like a positive term. It doesn't seem like a compliment. Identify women who demonstrate intellectual skill. Again, it's not actually a very positive term, and it wasn't used to refer to women who demonstrate intellectual skill. It refers to people who are calling for the right of women to vote. So criticize women who enter male-dominated professions. Again, not really. I mean, here they're criticizing women for wanting to become like men. So condemn women who agitate, who want the vote for their sex, who want to vote for their own gender, for women. So this looks like the best answer. That looks like the best answer. Now, as used in line 36, best most nearly means, let's go back to line 36, though disfranchised or disenfranchised, we have few women in the best sense. And when we read this, we said that here best would actually mean actual or true or real sense. So though disenfranchised, we have few women in the actual sense. We have simply so many variations and reflections and copies of the masculine gender. So here, best, in the best sense, in the true or the actual sense. So we're looking for a synonym for true or actual. As used in line 36, best most nearly means superior. Not exactly. It's not used in this meaning. Excellent is like superior, so they're both cancelled for the same reason. Genuine. Genuine means true. Rarest, not actually. So our best answer is genuine. because we're not talking about something which is rare. We're talking about something which is true or original or actual or real. Now, Stanton contends, she says, that the situation she describes in the passage has become so dire, so urgent, that even men have begun to lament the problems they have created, join the call for women's suffrage, consider women their social equals, ask women how to improve civic life. Nothing was mentioned about men joining the call for women's suffrage. Maybe some men did, but the text didn't talk about that. Men have considered women their social equals. Again, Stanton doesn't mention this in the text. Ask women how to improve civic life. They didn't do this, of course. They lament the problems they have created. And I knew this was the correct answer from the beginning, not because I'm smart or anything. It's because if you go back to the text and you read this part, which I still remember because it's stuck in my head, so you could actually find it right here. And now man himself stands appalled, horrified at the results of his own excesses, at the results of his own deeds, his own actions, and he mourns. Mourn is just actually a synonym of lament. It's when you feel sorry and sad for something that happened or for doing something. You regret it in a sense. In bitterness, that falsehood, selfishness, and violence are the law of life. And again, these have become the law of life because women have been deciding what the law of life should be or has to be. So they lament the problems they have created. This is the best answer we have. Which choice best describes or provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? Again, I'm so confident by my answer in this one that I actually don't need to go through all of these options again. I mean, I could just go up and I could check where the information I relied on was. And now man himself stands appalled. This is on line 53, and it ends in 55. And voila, 53, 55. So again, I really don't waste my time. Because again, when you're confident of your answer on the first one, there's no need to waste time on the second one because you know where you got this information from. Now, the sixth paragraph, lines 67 to 78, is primarily concerned with establishing a contrast, a difference. When we're contrasting, we're finding differences between men and women, the spiritual world and the material world, bad men and good men, men and masculine traits. So, let's take a look. So we're referring to this paragraph, line 67 to line 78. So in speaking of the masculine element, masculine trait, or the men, I do not wish to be understood to say that all men are hard, selfish, and cruel. For many of the most beautiful spirits the world has known have been clothed with manhood. But I refer to those characteristics. She's talking about characteristics, though often marked in women, that distinguish what is called the stronger sex. For example, the love of acquisition and conquest, the very pioneers of civilization, when expanded on the earth, when they take effect on the earth, the sea, the elements, the riches and forces of nature are powers of destruction, when used to subjugate, to oppress one man to another, or to sacrifice nations to ambition. So it's not contrasting men and women, of course. There is no contrast between men and women. There is no contrast between the spiritual world and the material world. So we're stuck between bad men and good men and contrasting men with masculine traits. Now, you might be tempted to go for C, which is bad men and good men. Now, yes, she does talk about what constitutes bad men, and that's the love of acquisition and destruction and violence and subjugation of others and so on. But she doesn't actually tell us what good men are, although it might come naturally to you that of course good men would be the opposite of everything she said, but she didn't discuss what makes men good, what are the qualities or the characteristics that make good men. So she wasn't contrasting bad men and good men, she was contrasting men with masculine traits, the masculine traits that make men so bad, and that it's not the problem of men, because again she said that some men are not hard, are not hard and selfish and brutal, because some of them, some of the most beautiful spirits, have been clothed with manhood, but she's referring to those characteristics. So here she's trying to differentiate between men. She doesn't have a problem with men. She has a problem with the characteristics of men, or the masculine traits which have destroyed society, which is, again, the masculine traits are the love of destruction and violence and subjugation and the oppression and so on. So those are the answers. And again, I feel quite confident. I don't think this was a particularly difficult text to deal with. So let's go through the answers as we usually do. We did questions 33 to 42, so we're going down to 33. Here's 33 and 34, B and A. So B, A. Let's check 35 and 36. 35 and 36, D and B. So here's D and here's B. Then go down to 37 and 38, B and D. B and D, so here's B and here's D. 39 and 40, C and A, C, A. Finally 41 and 42, so B and D. Here's B and here's D. If you have any questions or if there's anything that I rushed over, or if there's anything that I didn't explain or discuss as well as I should have, please let me know in the comments section. If you have any questions, any comments, any likes or dislikes, please make them known in the comments section. If you believe that a lot of people could benefit from what we're doing here, please like, subscribe, and share with people so that they could benefit from this. And stay tuned for some more videos. On the next one, we'll be going through the fifth and final text in the second practice test. So again, take care, and I hope you enjoy your time studying the SAT almost as much as I enjoy solving the SAT, because I mean, I like to approach things in a positive way, and I think that if you do so as well, you'll be able to deal with the SAT in a much better way. And as you can see, again, we're going through all of the text. We've gone through 4 so far, and we haven't had a single incorrect answer. Do I prepare these things in advance? Well, I do them all by myself, and I correct them for myself, and to be quite honest, and I rarely, if ever, get incorrect answers on those, because again, I think that by practicing a lot, you could actually get to a point where you know how the examiner actually forms the questions and what they mean by the questions, and you begin to notice these tiny details in the options they give you and in the wording of the question, and you begin to get used to the question format, and you get faster. Of course, we're taking our time discussing and reading on the SAT exam. As we said, you're gonna have only 13 minutes per text in the reading. You have 65 minutes in total. You have 5 texts, so you're gonna need to be quite fast, of course. But again, with practice, you could get to a point where you could go through a whole text with the answers, with answering the questions, in 10 to 11 minutes. This is possible, maybe even less sometimes. I've personally experienced finishing the SAT in the reading part in much less than 65 minutes. So again, it's possible. With practice, you could do it. And again, if you have any questions, any comments, please let me know. I'd love to help anyone who needs any help on this. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for more.